Chapter 22 is about Reconstruction, and we're going to introduce Andrew Johnson to the White House. So we start off with a little bit of a picture here about Charleston. And Charleston is destroyed. Handsome cities of yesteryear, such as Charleston, Richmond, were rubble-strewn and weed-choked. And Atlanta returned to his once fair hometown and remarked, "Hell has laid her egg, and right here it's hatched." A lot of destruction in the Deep South, a lot of resentment towards the North and towards Lincoln. One of the things your chapter talks about is exodusters, and this is a group of people who migrate from the Deep South, former slaves, and kind of use the term from exodus as they leave the land of slavery and enter into the land of milk and honey. Apparently that's Kansas. Name given to African Americans who fled southern United States, and they end up in Kansas. So that, I guess, explains the duster part of it. After the end of Reconstruction, racial oppression and rumors of the reinstitution of slavery led many of these former slaves, or now called freedmen, to seek a new place to live. And this is an early photograph of those Buffalo Soldiers, as they were called by many of the Native Americans. And of course, the reggae song by Bob Marley, Buffalo Soldier. Let's see if I can get that to play here real quick. Apparently it's not going to play for me today. Freedmen's Bureau is set up using Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. Set up 5 different districts in the Deep South to help kind of reinstitute these former slaves into society and help them with education, help them with jobs, issuing rations, clothing, medicine, other kind of things to help reconstruct the South. Alexander Stephens, the former Vice President of the Confederacy South, interestingly enough, is elected as a congressman and returned to the United States Congress, along with 4 former Confederate generals, 5 colonels, and worst of all, the Vice President of the South. You can imagine the North and their outrage when some of these men returned. Many Northerners felt they should be executed on charges of high treason. They led the rebels in their secession movement. So you can imagine that not a whole lot of congressional progress is made in the areas of Reconstruction, especially when our leader has been assassinated. Republicans, these are Northerners in most cases. The Northern Republicans were alarmed to realize that a restored South is stronger, okay? It's stronger than ever before in national politics, because no longer are we counting 3/5 of the slaves, but after the census of 1870, we are now counting 5/5 are all slaves. So the population in the South actually increases, giving the Southerners 12 more votes. And the overall number in Congress does not increase. So not only does the South get 12 more votes at the expense of the North loses votes. Add that with the fact that 5 generals, colonels, and the ex-president are the ones coming back. It leads to a very contentious Congress in this post-Reconstruction, post-Civil War Reconstruction era. One of the interesting things you can look at here is the census of 1860. And I like to look in particular here at population of South Carolina. Population total is 668, but look at this area here. This is the census of 1860. And so if you look at South Carolina, you have 301,000 free versus 402,000 slaves. So you can imagine that the population of South Carolina has more blacks than whites in 1870. So they are allowed to send, in this case, in 1860, they send this many representatives to Congress. How many of these representatives, you might ask, in 1870 will be white, and how many will be black? You would imagine that if the population is 100,000 more former slaves, African Americans, they should, South Carolina that is, should be allowed or should represent these 400,000 slaves with African American congressmen. But these 703,000 total people in South Carolina are represented with an entirely white delegation, of course, because of black codes and other KKK and other intimidating politically active factions. All right, so we have a bit of a issue with the Deep South. Military reconstruction then is interrupted when Abraham Lincoln is assassinated and Andrew Johnson, a Southerner, comes in to try to put into place his new plan for reconstruction. He runs into all kinds of issues then with his cabinet. His cabinet, he inherits Lincoln's cabinet, and Lincoln's cabinet wants to continue with Lincoln's plan for reconstruction. However, Johnson has a new plan for reconstruction. Edwin Stanton ends up becoming center in this controversy. If you go back to these 5 military districts and the enforcement of the Freedmen's Bureau and the enforcement of Lincoln's plan for reconstruction in these 5 districts, Johnson comes into office, has a different plan for reconstruction, but Stanton wants to carry out his previous boss's plan for reconstruction. He wants to carry out Lincoln's plan for reconstruction. So naturally, as a cabinet member, Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton is really kind of disregarding his new boss's plan. And this is kind of blatantly disobeying his new boss. Now, Johnson is going to consider firing his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, because Edwin Stanton is not, basically, he's not following orders. But just in the nick of time, Congress passes this Tenure of Office Act. So in the Constitution of the United States, it talks about a president has the power to get advice from the cabinet, and these cabinet officials can be appointed upon approval by Senate. So you need Senate's approval to get the job. But the Constitution does not talk at all about firing cabinet members. It's very vague on that. And so Congress, when Johnson starts to threaten firing Edwin Stanton, Congress quickly passes a law that says the president cannot fire anybody without congressional approval. So it says the United States, the power to remove somebody, a cabinet member, to remove somebody from office that has been appointed by a past president. You cannot remove this person without consent of the United States Senate. And the United States Senate in the 1860s is not going to give their new president, a Southerner, Johnson, permission to fire Stanton. So this law is put into place to protect Stanton. so that Stanton can continue to enforce Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. Well, of course, Johnson is going to fire Stanton. So the question is, did Johnson violate the law? Now, in a strictly legal sense, yes, Johnson violated this law, the Tenure of Office Act. He fired without permission of Senate. Johnson's justification was that this law here is unconstitutional. This law is a political law put into place to limit the power of the president by the Senate. So Johnson goes ahead and fires Stanton, violating this law, but he says this law is unconstitutional. Thus, it leads to Johnson's impeachment. Now, impeachment goes through Congress. Congress, the House of Representatives is the first step. House of Representatives agreed to impeach Johnson. Then it goes to trial, and in the trial it's the United States Senate. We will continue with this tomorrow.